fucking do this then. Here we are, Fred on Film, at Fred Asquith on Film, TikTok, Instagram. Hello to everyone, we are back. And today we've got a really exciting episode of sort of semi-housekeeping discussion topics that is not a filler episode. I made sure to wait long enough. I'd post once a week, but I always make sure that I've got enough stuff to talk about before I make the leap into actually recording. And I've done the same this week. I'm really excited about the things we've got to talk about. And so I'm going to dive in rather than do an agenda, because I hope it's going to be sort of like an interesting stream of consciousness journey through lots of discussive topics. The first thing I want to say is I'm loving the comments, always loving the comments and interactions, DMs. For example, at SimOfFilms3391 said, have you put any thought into doing a mailbag Q&A? No. Imagine if I answered that. Now, fuck off. Would be keen for some dialogue between you and the audience. Well, the answer is, at SimOfFilms3391, that like I'm always open to questions and DMs, and if I deem them good enough or interesting enough, we will always tackle them on the pod. So send them in. That's at Fred Asquith on Film, TikTok, Instagram. A DM on Instagram is the best way to get hold of me. Speaking of which, I went to Pulp Kitchen's 200th episode recording last night at the Leicester Square Theatre. Long-time listeners of the show will know that Pulp Kitchen is another film podcast that is a friend of this show, if you know what I mean. So James and George are good friends of mine. They started this whole deal 4 years ago, so me being a year into it, I'm pretty young by comparison. So I do look up to them. I think what they do is incredible, and they do it so it's so easy to listen to, and they do it so consistently. And so they deserved all the plaudits they got last night at the Leicester Square Theatre. It was sold out, 200th episode recording. They had games and rankings and things like this, and I absolutely loved it. And another nice little tidbit was I met loads of lovely FoF listeners. So thank you all for coming up to me. You know who you are. Obviously, there is a little bit of a crossover in the audiences, not least because it's film content, but because I've been on their Patreon episodes, Double Take. They've mentioned me on a couple of times on the main episode, and I've mentioned them loads of times on here too. So the audiences for both are a Venn diagram. It's just their circle is much larger than this circle, but that's okay. We're a family, and we're a tight-knit family, and we will grow, and we will get to the 200th episode. But I did think when I was watching them, what would my 200th episode even fucking be? Because it's fine when you've got a duo. You can do some interaction with the crowd in the second half, fine. But when you've got a duo, you can just do a normal podcast recording in the first half, and it's cool because you're listening to a dialogue. Imagine if I just went on... I just got this sofa shipped in to Leicester Square Theatre. Anyone who watches on YouTube knows I do this on a big orange sofa. Just get this shipped in, and then what? Just monologue at a live audience for an entire first half? It's not going to work. So then I talked to a lovely listener of the show at the event, and they suggested, well, you could get guests. And then I was like thinking, yeah, absolutely. And that is the only answer. But then would that actually be interesting for listeners of a podcast of one solo person then going to see a show that is absolutely nothing like the podcast they listen to? Do you know what I mean? Because I quite deliberately don't get guests, because I don't clam up, but you need a good dynamic with them, right? That's why James and George work so well. They've been friends for so long. And I've tried it with guests in the past. I've tried it with co-hosts, and it never quite worked. And that's why I started this on my own, so that I could just go on my own volition, and I have I have a good chemistry with myself. You know what I mean? So then if I did a live show where I had guests, would that ruin the dynamic? Possibly. I'd maybe have to get Pulp Kitchen down and show and just come on stage with me. Just have a hybrid episode. Anyway, we will get there, and we will do it, and who knows what it'll be when we'll get there. Maybe we'll have acquired a co-host by that point. Maybe I'll bump into my future co-host. Maybe I don't know them yet. It's incredible. It'll still be called that Fred Asquith on Film. I don't care if I have a fucking co-host. It's almost like Mark Commode's show with Simon Mayo. Oh no, that is called Kermo and Mayo, isn't it? No, it's called. What is it called? It's called Hot Take or something. What is it called? Anyway, stopped listening to it. Anyway, yeah, thank you. Honestly, thank you for all the listeners that came up. I really enjoyed talking to you all, and like it is a strange feeling to be talking on my own in this room and being aware that people are listening because I'm seeing the numbers, but like not actually having any tangible proof. And so the more and more people are coming up to me and saying, oh, I really enjoy the pod, it feels like such a personal, rewarding thing to hear because, like, you know, when I do these comedy videos on my main profile, it's characters and stuff, right? Sometimes I'll do like a candid rant or something, but you know, it's produced and edited in a sense, whereas this is just me. So if you come up to me and say, I enjoy listening to the pod, I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Like, you choose to spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a week or every fortnight listening to my bullshit. Like, that's really, really flattering. So thank you. And to put like human faces to those names in the DMs and comments is like really surreal, really. Like, even me talking right now, I almost am blissfully unaware that anyone's actually fucking listening. But I talked to a few people about that, and they were really encouraging and said to keep doing what I'm doing and to keep progressing in the solo format. And a couple of people said they like it because it feels like a sort of passionate, personal, rant style movie podcast in contrast with other movie podcasts they listen to that are of other styles that are equally or if not more valuable. For example, Pulp Kitchen. So I like it. I might have made myself a little niche there and I can slot in alongside those other options that you all have. So thank you very much for listening. Another thing that I gleaned from the Pulp Kitchen 200 night was something that I'm going to credit to them quite heavily, which is that they did this brilliant series recently, or it was a couple of episodes, which was the listing 10 perfect movies. That was their challenge. Like, we have 10 out of 10 movies, we have blah, blah. What are the 10 perfect movies that, like, you can say, do you know what, that is not perfect. You might not even give it 10 out of 10, but it's not perfect. The best example for me is School of Rock. I think that is a perfect movie. You wouldn't take one scene out of it, put one scene in, and it absolutely does what it needs to do, and blah, blah, blah. So when I was listening to that conversation, that was then conjoined with another question, which was like, no, that was then conjoined with this hot take section where someone said, About Time is one of the greatest rom-coms ever, and blah, blah, blah. And I actually do agree with that. I think About Time is a brilliant movie. That's the Richard Curtis movie, Rachel McAdams and Donald Gleeson. Richard Curtis obviously also directed Love Actually. And I think both those movies, About Time and Love Actually, are examples of movies that are not perfect, but are 10 out of 10. Do you get where I'm going with this? So actually, Pulp Kitchen did some great discussions around perfect movies. I think a worthwhile discussion would be imperfect 10 out of 10s. Movies that, you know, it's not quite guilty pleasure. I don't want to hear like, oh, I love Battlefield Earth with John Travolta because it just makes me laugh. I mean, it could be that, but it's not, is it? Right? It's like movies that are genuinely very good and deliver what they're supposed to deliver, even in spite of the fact that they may be imperfect and flawed. So for me, I love Love Actually more than About Time. And, you know, some of the original Harry Potters, or I've even got this new 4K Titanic on my shelf, right? Is Titanic a perfect movie? A lot of people would argue no, but it is a 10 out of 10. It's an imperfect 10 out of 10 for me. Just looking on my shelf for more options. Of what have I got? I'll tell you what I've got myself. Pursuit of Happiness, Rock and Roller, Dreamgirls. These weren't purchased by me. They were purchased by my darling wife. Napoleon Dynamite. Napoleon Dynamite could be an example, to be honest. Imperfect 10 out of 10. Anyway, I would like you to send in your suggestions. It's not quite guilty pleasures. It's imperfect 10 out of 10 movies. I can't be clearer than that, and I will not say it one more time. I hope you understand what I mean. And I'll try and think of some more examples in the meantime during this recording. But that is my shout out to you. Send me those movies, suggestions of those movies, and we'll maybe do a rundown at some point. Next up, I just want to touch on the One Battle After Another Fallout. So obviously this came out a couple of weeks ago. I give it a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 glowing review. It's my favourite film of the year so far. This is the Paul Thomas Anderson, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tiana Taylor action thriller. Drama, action-y thriller. And the big discussion was around A, is it a modern classic? I think yes. And B, will it make its money back? Because the budget was quite extraordinarily $130 million, which is more than double any previous budget for a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which are generally chin-strokery cinephile movies. It looks like after 2 and a bit weeks, it may just make its money back. So it's currently sitting on $100 million global box office. So given it's 130 million, you generally have to double that figure in order to account for marketing spend and other shit that I don't quite understand. So we're talking 260 million to sort of make its money back. If it's got 100 million after 2 weeks, you'd think that's probably going to finish after 6 to 8 weeks on generously maybe 200 million. And then maybe VOD or video on demand, is that what it's called? Yeah, VOD, fucking hell, had a stroke. Streaming, it might make a bit more. So you may be hoping that this film can now break even. It's probably lost all hope of like being massively, massively profitable. Does that matter to me personally? No. I just think in 10, 20, 30 years, we'll still be talking about this film and no one will be talking about whether it made money or not. Do you know what I mean? So, and it'll probably win Best Picture, and then it'll have a bit of a bump in the figures anyway. I have since rewatched One Battle After Another since I've done my review, and I'm not going to go on and on about it. But one thing that I really took away from this second viewing was just how well paced it is. So it is, it's a long movie. And like I said in my first review, you don't feel that length whatsoever. And I was really trying to like ponder as I was watching it, why does this not feel very long? And I think I've put my finger on it. And I said this theory to my mate on the way out, and he said, "Oh, that's a really good theory. You could say that on the pod." It's not so much a theory; it's just an observation that I think is fucking correct. Like I think it's factually correct. So I think it's the reason why it doesn't feel so long is because Paul Thomas Anderson is a master, pardon the pun, at prologues and epilogues. You might think I'm not reinventing the wheel by saying that, but it felt like a revelation to me as to why his films feel well paced, is because nearly all of them have prologues that can sometimes last up to 30 minutes. You could argue that the One Battle After Another prologue, up until Tiana Taylor's character goes off into the wilderness, is like a 30-40 minute prologue. And equally, there is a prologue in Magnolia that's 10-15 minutes that's got some quite heavy voiceover about coincidences. There's a prologue in There'll Be Blood, which is famously dialogue free, where Daniel Plainview is drilling his first well, and he inherits this baby of his deceased colleague. That's before we then skip forward time, and he's grown, and the boy is grown up, and Daniel Plainview is pitching to a new village. That's similar to One Battle After Another. Tiana Taylor goes off in the distance, the baby grows up, and boom, the prologue is over. Chase Infinity is here as the 16-year-old version. Other examples. I feel like there's examples for nearly all his films. The Master definitely has a prologue. So that's Joaquin Phoenix pissing around, can't find a job. He's in the army, shagging a sandcastle on the beach, and then he's drinking in the bowels of a ship, it looks like, and then he gets a job as a photographer in a department store. Like, this is all prologue before he finds himself on the ship of Philip Seymour Hoffman and gets processed. Equally, his films invariably have quite similar style epilogues, and this is something that I'd definitely considered before, just not in regards to the pacing thing. So There'll Be Blood has a very clear epilogue where, again, there's a time break, and then Daniel Plainview, older, has this discussion with his now older son in this giant mansion, and he's all corrupt and vile and crooked, and then he has the discussion with Paul, played by Paul Dano. Oh, sorry, is it Eli? Yeah, it was Eli, played by Paul Dano, in the bowling alley, and then that's your ending. That's like a 30-minute epilogue. Equally, in The Master, we have Joaquin Phoenix goes to visit Philip Seymour Hoffman and at his new headquarters, wherever they may be. This is after he's driven off on the motorcycle, and they have a conversation, and Philip Seymour Hoffman sings at him, I want to get you on a slow boat to China. It's kind of a weird scene. Clear epilogue, right? Inherent Vice, I feel like there was a clear epilogue in Inherent Vice. In Licorice Pizza, and I've forgotten it. Anyway, you get what I'm saying, that there is this Phantom Thread has the epilogue with the poisoning at the end. This is a clear structural trait of Paul Thomas Anderson to have prologues and epilogues. And long story short, I need a fucking prologue and epilogue to this rant. Long story short, that then means that the central section can not only feel fast because it's separated from the start and end, but it can also be basically chock full, in the case of One Battle After Another especially, chock full of action. And even if it's not actual straight up action, like in Phantom Thread, it's not action. It's at least a kind of montage, like a dreamy montage of scenes, often overlaid and overlapped by the Blinky Plonky scores of Johnny Greenwood. So, and it's almost, in One Battle After Another, it's almost Nolan-esque. Like that central section, which let's say is an hour and a half, is Nolan-esque, just like overlapping scenes of increasing tension, increasing stakes, and scenes that infer on the other scenes. And so that then rises. We reach that peak, and then we have the epilogue of Sean Penn's character going to the Christmas Adventurer's office and Chase Infinity showing Leonardo DiCaprio how to use a fucking phone. So we have a prologue that's 40 minutes, an epilogue that's 10-15 minutes, and then in the middle, we have an hour and a half chunk of action. So when you're watching the movie and that prologue ends, mentally, and this accounts for all his prologues, mentally you almost reset. And you shuffle in your chair and you're like, oh, okay. Like you kind of have to, you're recalibrating. And this is something, again, I thought, in a movie I was watching yesterday, which I'll come on to talk about. I thought again about how, when you start movies, and this especially accounts for comedies, when you start a movie, it's quite easy to be entertained at the start of a movie because you're being introduced to locations, themes, characters, plot lines, and everything is fresh. And that accounts most for a comedy because if you introduce a new character that's particularly extravagant, they're going to be most likely funny upon first meeting. And later on, they may have dried up of all the best lines, or you might have got sick of them. You can literally feel the screenwriter in a comedy almost packing all their best ideas early on. Hear me out here. When a film has this prologue, central, epilogue structure, you almost get that sensation of reintroducing yourself twice. So you get the start at the start of the prologue, and then you get the start of the central section. And so it's almost like, it almost has that natural bounce of oh, this is something new again. And that and with that coming 40 minutes into a film, or let's say conservatively 30 minutes in, it means that your brain is reignited, and it's almost like fresh stimulation, and it gives you this placebo effect of this isn't long because we're starting again. And somehow he makes that not feel laborious, because it could easily feel laborious if you felt like you were back to square one. So I found that really interesting, thinking about that, and I'll shut up about it now. Watching it again, it's settled at third on my ranking of Paul Thomas Anderson movies. So that's 1, There'll Be Blood; 2, Phantom Thread; 3, One Battle After Another. I did think that upon rewatch it might shoot above Phantom Thread, but it hasn't, because I realised on the second watch I've built such a big relationship with Phantom Thread over a long period of time. I think I must have seen that movie 8 times or something. And I need to allow One Battle After Another to have that, to build that same relationship. Equally, nothing's ever going to touch There'll Be Blood. I do think that's the best film ever made. And you've heard me rant on about that. So anyway, settled at 3. Going to run through some other things, sip of my juice. Sipping My Juice merch coming soon. Going to run through some other things. I'm trying not to appear rushed in this episode because I'm actually not rushed. But it's 3 o'clock as I record this, and I do have the B Creator Awards tonight. I'm nominated for Creator of the Year. Yes. So next time you have an episode, you will be hearing from either the Creator of the Year, and that's included Pulp Kitchen, or a loser. So fingers crossed. And that I need to be there at 5:45. So I am, I guess, trying to... I guess it's convenient that there wasn't a film to review this week. However, there are 5 things that I have seen that I'd like to touch on. No, 6. No, 7. No, 8. Okay, I'm not going to do 8 reviews. Don't get me wrong. I'm just going to run through these quickly, right? Steve, the new Cillian Murphy movie on Netflix about him being a beleaguered teacher in the 90s. I watched it. I have to admit I second screened it, so it doesn't deserve... No, I don't deserve to give it a full review. However, I thought that Cillian Murphy's performance was predictably brilliant, and it seemed to be really, really effective to me. And I was second screening because I was busy with other work. It's been a very busy week, which we'll come on to. But I think that seems like it's worth a watch, as valuable as that is as a recommendation. Next up, a couple of TV things. The new Alan Partridge series is out on BBC. That's How Are You? With Alan Partridge. And I'm a fan of Alan Partridge. I became a fan of his, as many of you will have become a fan of his when we were teenagers. I assume a lot of you are millennials like me. Going back and watching I'm Alan Partridge from the 1999-2000 series. And then into, I remember by the time it got to Mid-Morning Matters, I was massively into it. And then we had, this time on BBC, we had The Scissor Dial on Sky. And this is a new kind of 6-part faux documentary series about mental health. And I just want to say off the back of, we discussed recently Mitchell and Webb started a new sketch show on Channel 4 off the back of Mitchell and Webb Look in the noughties. And I was saying how I felt it didn't feel right in today's TV era. I feel like what's so brilliant about the Alan Partridge character is that it's been able to feel fresh at any point you drop it in, and any format as well. Like even the film's pretty decent, Alpha Papa. So I think this BBC series is once again written brilliantly. The observations are astute, and crucially, unlike a character like David Brent, he is not a product of his environment, so you can't. So you don't have to see Alan Partridge in the case of David Brent, like an office, or in the case of the royal family, like a lounge, or Gavin and Stacey, or it's obviously ridiculous to even suggest that would happen. But you know what I'm saying? Like as a comedy character, he doesn't exist only in one place, and also crucially, as a comedy character, he is distinct enough to know what you're going to get. And he's distinct enough so that the comedy comes from the character, but also he's fluid enough as a character to cover a vast range of topics in a vast range of scenarios and with a vast range of emotions. So like he can equally be the fall guy, be quite fallible and be very, very silly, as he can be quite authoritarian, aggressive, angry, pointed, intelligent. He can be really insightful and then at the same time be really dopey. And I think that's really important for the longevity of this character. Again, I'll use David Brent as an example. Once you actually dug underneath the first 2 BBC series of David Brent, and he brought out Life on the Road and whatnot, you find that the character is quite one note. There is only kind of one gear for David Brent, but Alan Partridge has the full spectrum of gears. And that's why the character continues to work. And I think this series is working. I'm also watching Married at First Sight UK. It's a pile of bollocks. I'm also watching Great British Bake Off. Kind of a pile of bollocks. I think it might have even finished by now. I actually don't give a shit. I also started the new Celebrity Traitors last night. Also a bag of bollocks, but I will watch it. I think there are some good astute castings on there. For example, Joe Wilkinson, I think, is good casting. Stephen Fry is brilliant casting because he elevates the prestige of the show, especially considering, I think Claire Baldwin has prestige and Tom Daly has prestige, but I just think Stephen Fry is like He's a cut above the rest in terms of he is a legend of so many fields in the British media landscape, from writing to live performances, and obviously directing, acting, comedy, TV presenting. I think that he is a legend, and he's also massively intelligent, obviously, and a really interesting guy. So I think he's good casting. So there's also fun stunt casting, Alan Carr, Jonathan Ross. Not keen on all of them, but I think, there's a real nice range. So I will be watching the Celebrity Traitors. There's actually way too much coming out at the moment. There's a fucking Victoria Beckham Netflix documentary coming out, I think tomorrow or today as I speak, and there's too much to watch. Anyway, speaking of which, I watched Monster, not the Netflix series about Ed Gein, which we'll come on to, but I watched Monster, the Charlize Theron movie about the serial killer. I can't remember her name. And Charlize Theron won the Oscar for this performance, right? And I remember this movie only for one reason, and it's because my mum came back from the cinema when I was younger and said she had to walk out because one of the scenes was too unbearable to watch, which I won't repeat on the air. But needless to say, I'd kind of always put off watching it because I always thought it might be very disturbing or very dark. It is very dark, obviously. It's about a serial killer. But what I found really interesting about it was it was almost like a sympathetic, like very insightful view on the makings of a serial killer. And you saw the softness and the vulnerability within that Charlize Theron character. And even though you can never understand someone doing what she did, it at least led you down the path of how that psychology worked to get to that point. And I was so pleasantly surprised. I've been thinking about it ever since. Charlize Theron absolutely deserved to win the Oscar. And I've rated it on my Letterboxd. Go view that review. So speaking of Monster, there's the long-running, iterative, sort of episodic, I should say, umbrella series called Monster on Netflix, which depicts the development and inner workings and acts of, I guess, famous US serial killers. The first series was the Jeffrey Dahmer story. The second series was the Menendez brothers story. And now this third series is about Ed Gein, who did all sorts of unspeakable things, which I will not speak of. But I actually have to say that this is the first of the three. I enjoyed the first two series, and this third one is the first one that I have turned off. Not because it was too crass or too disgusting, but because it felt actually bad. It felt kind of bad. And without going into too much detail, because I don't think I can be arsed, I found that it tried to depict his acts as almost a product of his fantasies, but in doing so took you into those fantasies, one of which is like a Nazi officer. There's like dream sequences, and the problem is that there's like moments where he's like, where we're in the fantasy of Hitchcock on the set of Psycho, and this is all supposed to come back to this is what he was consuming in order to kind of feel like he wanted to do these things. It doesn't work for me because it meant that like you actually never got a foothold in like the reality of the character, because it felt like every time you felt like you were on stable ground, it then almost pulled the rug out from under you, almost like that thing that you would get taught at school, like don't write a story and then make the last line and then I woke up, because then it almost like diffuses the entire story, right? And so every scene that I was watching in this Ed Gein program, I was like, my engagement was pre-diffused by thinking, oh well, is this another fantasy sequence, or yeah, how much of this is real? Because I watch these, in a macabre sense, we all watch these almost wanting to learn, like factually, what did they do and why did they do it? But I want to learn that factually. I want to learn like how many crimes did he commit, when and why. I do want to know about the psychology of these people, just like Monster, the Charlize Theron movie. But But if it's depicted in a fantasy sense, I lose that factual grounding, and therefore it's not interesting to me anymore. A couple more things before we go. I just want to say it's the London Film Festival, and I've told you this on the pod, you are listening to a press-accredited London Film Festival delegate. I applied off the back of having this podcast. I said, look, I review movies. I'm a content creator. Can I have press accreditation? They fucking gave me it. I've got a pass with the QR code and everything. And I have exercised that right for the first time yesterday. There's a full schedule of press and industry screenings as well as public screenings that we're allowed to apply for as well. I'm trying to see as many films as possible so that I can have the reviews in advance of them all coming out rather than relying on getting press or premiere screenings close to the time. So films coming up that I'm going to go see are Sentimental Value. That's a new Joachim Trier film who directed The Worst Person in the World, one of my favourite films of all time. We've got Hamnet, which is the Paul Mescal movie where he plays Shakespeare. We've got Bugonia, which is the new Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone movie directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, pairing up again. We've got Frankenstein, the new Guillermo del Toro movie with Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi. We've got Wake Up Dead Man, which is Knives Out 3. We've got Die My Love with Jennifer Lawrence. These are all movies that I am going to go see in the next week or so that I have reviews ready for you. But I want you to know that the press and industry screenings are a privilege, but they are also scheduled at ridiculous times. So anyone who's following the @FredAsquithOnFilm Instagram profile will know, because I posted stories about it, that I got up at 5 a.m. and gymmed and got to Picture House Central for 8 a.m. for Wake Up Dead Man Knives Out 3 on Tuesday morning, only to find that it was actually on Wednesday morning. So I stupidly did the exact same commute again, 5 a.m. and gymmed because I'm a fucking stupid maniac. I don't know why I did that. And then went to 8 a.m. screening of Wake Up Dead Man, and I was absolutely fucking knackered. 2 5 a.m. mornings, I do not recommend it, right? But I did see Wake Up Dead Man and Knives Out 3 in what I believe to be, well, what is certainly the first UK screening, but maybe the first worldwide screening, because it was even before the gala screening, which was at the Royal Festival Hall later the same day. So I saw Wake Up Dead Man. I think I'm going to save a full review for when it comes out next month, because that's the reason why I'm seeing all these films in advance, so I can get reviews in advance. So I'm not going to spoil those reviews now. But this is the last thing I'm going to talk about in this podcast. So if you don't want to hear any opinion on Wake Up Dead Man before it comes out, do switch off now. This is the last thing I'm going to say, so there's nothing after this that you're going to miss. I'm just going to say @FredAsquithOnFilm, thank you and goodbye. So if you don't want to hear opinion on Wake Up Dead Man, please leave now. Okay, here is my quick opinion. I think it's nowhere near as strong as the first one, but it's certainly stronger than the second one. So I think this all comes down to the aesthetic. I think there was something about the second one, which was Glass Onion, which was on the affluent island of Edward Norton's character, that felt a bit reductive, and it felt a bit kind of like in that kind of Blink Twice, White Lotus-y arena of like, let's get loads of rich people on an island and laugh at them. Like I found that a bit like derivative of other things, and it was all part and parcel of the same vibe that we were getting from a lot of content at that time. And also, visually, I just don't think Benoit Blanc, which is Daniel Craig's detective character, worked in a more sanitized, rich glass environment. So what's good about this Wake Up Dead Man is it's set in a religious setting. You know, it's all set around this small village church and a communion, and so it's very gothic. It's very dark. There's like, you know, old buildings and dusty windows and kind of religious lore, and I think that's just a much richer palette for what I like about the Benoit Blanc character to feed off, which is more in line with what I liked about the first one. And I understand why they flipped the script in terms of flipping the aesthetic for the second one, but I'm glad it's flipped back. I don't think it's quite as strong as the first one, but we will come on to that in detail when the time comes. So, thank you for joining me for Fred Asquith on Film, TikTok, Instagram. We will be coming back next week with some fresh takes from the London Film Festival. After the Hunt, the new Luca Guadagnino film, which is out on Netflix same week, and also Frankenstein, which is the new Guillermo del Toro film, which is in cinemas next week, out on Netflix in November. I think I may review it when it's in cinemas, or I may save it for the Netflix release, I'm not sure. But After the Hunt, I will certainly be reviewing next week. And there's also all these celebrity traitors discussions. There's the fucking Victoria Beckham Netflix documentary. And there's also Mr. Scorsese, a documentary on Apple TV about Martin Scorsese. There's a John Candy documentary on Prime. These are all things that I'm going to try and consume in time for next week. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks again for the people who came to the Pulp Kitchen 200 and said hi. I really appreciate you sticking around for the very, very end of this podcast. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.